Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. Thank you for joining. This is Dr. Deborah Montoya with the Imperial County Office of Education, Imperial County SELPA. You are joining us today for an introduction to the California Practitioner's Guide for Educating English Learners with Disabilities, a focus on chapters 1 and 3. Our session will be recorded, so you will be able to watch the archive later and access it via our website, along with the presentation materials that you will be seeing today. Joining me today are my colleagues Lupita Rubio and Vanessa Lopez. They will be moderating the chat box, and we highly encourage you to enter any questions as you have them. Together, we are supporting the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence and CDE in improving outcomes for English learners with disabilities as SELPA content lead grantors in the area of ensuring that we support everyone in the field, everyone across California as technical assistants and as we grow together as a community of practice. So in saying that, I first of all wanted to do a quick check-in and wanted to get an idea of who's with us today. So some of you may be longing for travel, some of us not so much. But again, we want to check in with each other and continue to stay connected, continue to glean on each other's knowledge and practice and support of our students with who are English learners, and of course our students who are students with disabilities. So I'm going to launch a quick poll and get an idea of who has joined us this afternoon. So you should see a poll on your screen. So I think just about all participants have entered. I'm going to go ahead and end the polling. And let's see who's joined us today. Lots of school psychologists, friends. Welcome, school psychologists. I have to say, in my past practice, I was a school psychologist. Also having worked for a local district, a district special education director, as well as an administrator of special education, then later at the County Office of Education for programs for students with moderate to severe disabilities. So my 20-year journey through special education in different roles. So thank you, everyone. I'm very happy to see that we do have a general education teacher, some general education administrators, some SELPA friends, district administrators. So thank you and welcome, everyone. So first and foremost, I have to acknowledge the fact that we find ourselves in very different times and very troubling times. And though I'd like to be out in sunny LA area, as opposed to hot and smoldering area where I am now, I hope that one day we will be able to see each other in person. But although we are connecting virtually, I still want to ensure that it's meaningful for you and that as caring and appreciative partners of each other in our work, I ask that we practice patience and kindness with ourselves and others, especially knowing that practicing is part of an ongoing process. And we may find ourselves feeling in different ways on different days. So if you need to get up, take a break at any time during this session, I completely understand. And if you're listening via slipper and socks, I understand as well. So thank you again for participating. And again, wanting to share that your leadership is invaluable. We want to ensure that all students receive access and equitable instruction today and always moving forward. So thank you for joining and wanting to consider and continue to expand your knowledge as we talk about students with disabilities who are English learners. As the Imperial SELPA content lead, we are part of the system of support, hoping that, again, we can support everyone in the field and knowing that there are so many experts in the field wanting to also engage in conversations with you and collaborative work and work products with you. If you're wondering where are we are in that far, far southeast corner of California. Far from most, but here to serve nevertheless. So let's talk about who our students are, who our students in California are in need of, what types of resources and supports. Not too long ago, before school closures, we were talking about LCFF, developing the LCAP, and considering how students with disabilities fall into each of those subgroups. We as a SELPA provide consultation and support to our COE, to our LEAs, to discuss those same LCAP statewide priorities and how students with disabilities are in that formula. The unduplicated student count of low income, foster youth, and English learners. We too have questions, and we're called upon to consider how we serve all of our students. Also knowing that students with disabilities are general education students first, and could also benefit from those intensive services being discussed, and how those supplemental and concentration dollars are expended to enhance and ensure students receive the services that they need in each of the subcategories. And you're also thinking likewise across California as you see this data before you, that many of your students that you serve are students with an IEP that fit into this bracket of low income, foster youth, and or English learners. So today we'll specifically focus on all of our students that are English learners that hold an IEP, but we'll also be discussing those students who you may be considering as a referral to special education eligibility. In this graph, you'll see across the state of California, and these data sheets are again just to frame our thinking, to help us look at and recognize, although a small pot of students, a very deserving pot of students of our support and our consideration as we design and develop services throughout our programs, whether you're a COE, at a district, or at a respective school site. So English learners do make up 28% of that population, and we see that students with disabilities are consistently and continuously falling behind, demonstrating low academic achievement or progress. And prior to school closures, and still today, you may be thinking of that dashboard, that ever-looming dashboard. Even though statewide assessments are now suspended, many of you were engaging in conversations related to root cause analyses, engaging in conversations regarding how services are provided to students. And as we look at all students as general education first, we understand that the Ed Code tells us that each child is a unique person with unique needs. And our purpose is to, again, assist them in developing their own potential to succeed and thrive. We'll be jumping into the California Practitioner's Guide for English Learners with Disabilities. It is truly a foundational piece of work that unites us, considering, again, the experts that came together to develop this practitioner's guide. Both we want to thank CDE, the EL division, and the special education division, because this is a fundamental and foundational instrument that will assist all of us in the field to calibrate with best practices and how to move forward with proper identification of English learners, ELs who may have a disability, and how to effectively ensure they receive the services they need. So we here at Imperial County SELPA are very much humbled, honored, and with gratitude. We assist in the dissemination of the guide and the opportunity to share our own experiences. So I will be sharing my own thoughts as well, in addition to the practitioner's guide. And we tend to always seek your guidance as well. We are collaborators with you, gleaning best practices and ensuring that all of us are looking towards best practices together. The practitioner's guide itself is separated into 5 sections: identification, pre-referral, educational programs, proposing exits, and then reclassification. You may be already familiar with the practitioner's guide, and each of the section has different entry points that you might find yourself leaning towards as part of your differentiated assistance, your root cause analyses. You may find that certain areas are of more interest or of need in your respective COE, district, or school. Today specifically, though, we will focus on Section 1, Chapter 1. Students with disabilities who may be identified as English learners will be our focus. Every chapter has the same development and design. As we look at the chapters itself, it will give us sections. I highly recommend that you visit the frequently asked questions. You'll find that many of the questions that are there are those that truly are frequent, that we see them in the field, you experience them, and that's somewhere where we often gravitate to as we're having collaborative conversations regarding our students. Okay. Some of the questions that will be addressed in this chapter will specifically focusing on how students with disabilities identified and classified as being English learners, and what strategies are being utilized. So as we delve into this particular chapter, I'd hope that everyone would really look at these questions posed as reflective questions. We can't say that any one system is perfect or that any one system can say we have everything exactly as it should be, because every child is so different. Every team is different, every makeup is different, and these questions tend to be reflective every time you have those student study teams and or student success teams. We will reflect on how appropriate and consistent identification processes can be implemented and perhaps are being implemented right now. So identification and classification of English learners is a central focus of this particular chapter. Who are English learners? Initially, an identification of English learners is where we begin this journey to ensure that students who are English learners are appropriately identified through the process. That we engage with families in these very important interview questions upon initial enrollment in any U.S. school. All students, whether U.S. born or foreign born, the essential questions are posed via the home language survey. You may want to consider, how is a home language survey provided to parents upon enrollment? Any other language than English will trigger the student's need to be assessed as an English learner. You may find that in your respective district, you're pondering, how do parents receive the questions? Is the interview encapsulated in your enrollment packet? Is the interview potentially found given to parents with supportive questions? Is it part of the parental interview as needed with all families? Are there interpreters available to translate other than in print? I can think of instances where perhaps a parent may not have completed it accurately due to concerns that being classified as an EL might be a negative, and not fully understand that indicating that the child is in fact an English learner will entitle that child to receive the additional services he or she needs. Additionally, we may find that families indicate that there is another language in the home, yet the child is only exposed to that other language occasionally, perhaps a parent, a grandparent, an aunt, a sitter that is only there with very, very small frequency and actually speaks to the children in English. Always things to consider to identify that when students are marked as an English learner, that it is true and correct. Once that is identified, that then starts that trajectory in and towards that initial LPAC. So very important to identify who are our students and where are they. Students at this time may be continuously enrolling in new districts. We have migration, students moving. So we may find that students today are trying to enroll within your district. And again, looking at how are they receiving this initial survey, the home language survey? Are there additional interviews that could be conducted or are being conducted as part of this process? So who are English learners? Very important to note, parent and guardians cannot opt their child out of taking the initial LPAC. Parents and guardian can make a request to change their responses prior to the administration of that initial LPAC. A parent guardian or a certificated employee may request a review of students' classification prior to taking the summative LPAC. It may be that a staff member has a suspicion that a student may be an English learner. However, the family did not indicate such on the enrollment. The discussion should be held or re-engage the family in those initial questions and in a conversation. It may be a rather sensitive interview to then have those conversations of, does the child need and require additional supports? What could they look like? And without assessment, we won't be able to truly identify what those needs are. Although, again, we find ourselves in very different times, and the current status of the initial LPAC has changed. So we see that the COVID-19 and the suspension of statewide testing has caused then a suspension to the summative LPAC. When? and we say when because we just don't know quite yet, but when school is back in session, there is a new extension. So we do have an extension, which is 45 days, typically 30, now 45 days, in which to conduct that initial LPAC of students as they enroll in your schools. So as students are continuously being enrolled, once schools are up and running, then they would be able to take that initial LPAC 45 days out. If you want more information, the link to the spotlight will be in the presentation slides when you receive them. So that does provide a change and lots of uncertainty as we enter that realm of when will schools open? We know though that we still have that responsibility to assess, and you may have had students who were already assessed just prior to schools closing. So we move forward and we consider the annual assessment. That annual assessment then is that summative assessment of LPAC. You may have started your window and have begun assessing students right before school closures. Some may be on pause where school closures occurred and that summative did not occur. When I speak of the annual assessment and the summative assessment, I will be referring to the summative LPAC or the alternate summative LPAC. In this case, and in current and present times, it would be your locally determined alternate assessment of English language proficiency. The true purpose then of that LPAC is to measure the measurement of students' yearly progress, identification in relationship to those ELD standards. So very important, where is the student now? How does that relate to the ELD standards? And there may be students who you were determining eligibility for reclassification. These specific prongs are part of Chapter 1 and we'll be going through them as we move forward. The information that the summative LPAC lends to us and gleans towards our work is very important. The initial and summative LPAC assessments that accurately measure what students know can then provide us with the necessary data to identify English language proficiency levels, adequately plan instruction, and further measure progress formatively and then summative via the summative LPAC. For ELs and ELs with disability, that yearly progress needs to be noted. So picture here you have a snapshot. The score report provides that brief summary of each LPAC performance level. A quick reference, if you will, to this information can be absolutely helpful even now as we work in distance learning to provide teachers with reminders of what does this mean? What does this information share with us? And have it at the forefront of their lesson planning, assisting us in gaining understanding of the students' abilities and the skills that they have and possible needs that the student can utilize to help further shape their learning, teachers' instructional planning, and lesson design to include various accessibility tools as needed. For instance, a student in, let's say, score level 3, many students in that level of the LPAC, needing help utilizing English to communicate on less familiar school topics and in less familiar social situations. When put into context of the ELD standard, these students are in this expanding level where they need moderate linguistic support as necessary. Linguistic support in this context does not necessarily mean a translator. I think that's a frequently asked question that we find, but rather think broadly as it refers to the resources, scaffolds, and accessibility tools, which may include some level of translation of the spoken language or in print form that enable the student to have the necessary access to curriculum and instruction. So please note that although time does not permit us to review the ELD standards today, the ELD standards is an absolute necessary resource that plays an instrumental role in the instruction of ELs and ELs with disability. Therefore, general education and special education teachers require training and ongoing collaboration in developing their abilities to understand the LPAC scores in combination with how to use those ELD standards, how they're incorporated and related to each other in the design of learning for students who are English learners and those who are English learners with a disability. Equally, for those students who are already eligible, it has these overarching layers where we want to ensure that the LPAC level the information, the baseline data, as well as how it relates to ELD standards is present in that child's respective IEP. This information will then help educators develop linguistically appropriate goals and objectives. So for more information on the IEP for ELs with disabilities, please refer to Chapter 5 of the Practitioner's Guide. So I'd like to do a quick check-in with our teams. As important as I mentioned that ELD standards are, and the combination of where is that child now? What does the data tell us, whether through the initial ELPAC or then having taken the summative, where is that ELPAC level and where is it in relation to ELD standards? Nevertheless, are we having active conversations? Our general education staff, our EL specialist, our special education staff, our EL specialists in special education meeting together and having collaborative conversations. So I wanted to launch a poll just to get a better idea of where perhaps you see your teams or where you hope to move forward with your teams. So I do have a poll that I will launch, and you should see it here. Our general education and special education staff provided with collaborative time for professional development related to ELPAC and ELD standards. Please enter, and it is completely anonymous. Please share. We have about 68% of you who had voted, and I truly appreciate your responses. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll, and let's share those results. So we see that some of you may have said not quite yet. Some absolutely in the next phases, and some of you, 25% already engaging your staff, general education and special education. And many of you may feel like, yes, and we'd like more of it. I can honestly say that this is very common in our local area and across the state, where we hope to further gather our collective knowledge, where we bring together special educators and general educators to have these collaborative conversations. We need each other. We need each other's expertise in support of all of the learners that we serve. The more that we have opportunities to engage in that session regarding ELD standards, regarding ELPAC levels, regarding the needs of ELs and ELs with disabilities, the stronger we all become for it. And it is challenging. I clearly understand with time constraints, staffing constraints, it becomes quite difficult. So I applaud those of you who said, yes, we're already in it, in as much as I applaud each one of you have said, not yet. And you're thinking, who will I speak to next? Who is that partner now across the virtual room, maybe not across the hallway from your office, but who you're thinking, who am I going to call next? Who can I bring into the fold and have those conversations about who are students who are English learners? What are their respective needs? And what we can learn from each other. I can say here at our particular county office of education, we have continued to lean on each other, our curriculum experts, our EL specialists, our special education specialists, to come together and have these conversations of how we can enrichly and deeply work with our respective staff that we support in our districts and our school sites to further these conversations in support of students, and specifically surrounding the area of ELPAC and accessibility. Because every particular test that's out there, we know that only if it's accessible to our students can they truly engage in the platform and demonstrate or show what they know. So as we look at collaborative training, this may be a starting and entry point for your respective COE, district, and or school site. I can only hope that again, that we're talking surrounding again, what accessibility tools are. What do they look like for ELs and ELs with disabilities to appropriately access the assessment and therefore then instruction? The majority of English learners and English learners with disabilities participate in the ELPAC. While dependent on the individual needs of the student, we do have students with significant cognitive disabilities who participate in the alternate ELPAC. For this purpose, when we think about the ELPAC in and of itself, we may have students that because of their disability do have certain areas of the domains, or certain domains, of the ELPAC omitted. Unlike our CASP assessment, where it's all or nothing, in the ELPAC, dependent on the child and their unique needs resulting of the disability, the IEP team may come into conversations and decide to omit or exempt certain sections of the ELPAC and or use an alternate assessment for those children with significant disabilities. The main prong is that we want to ensure that the actual assessment is accessible. Again, we can only do what the assessment allows us to do in those particular prongs, but ensuring that students have access, that students are be able to show what they know and that it's measuring what it's intended to measure. In December, this particular sheet did come out from the California Department of Education. You see before you the alternate assessment decision confirmation worksheet, in addition to an ELPAC administration student accessibility checklist. We hope that teams are gravitating towards these to help have those difficult conversations as to what particular tools are necessary, and again, to ensure that assessments are accessible. Prior to school closures, ELs with significant disabilities were in the process of taking the alternate, your locally developed alternate at this time, which for many across the state is the VCALPS, the Ventura County Comprehensive Alternate Language Proficiency Survey. Nevertheless, I have to say that CDE is working towards development and launching of the alternate ELPAC as we speak. And if the student is not referred to special education, so we're speaking of ELs and then ELs with disabilities. So if we think of ELs who are not students with a disability, they too have the ability to access all of the universal supports and those designated supports. We find that at times the designated supports aren't quite looked at when we're speaking of ELs. Our ELs with disabilities, of course, have access to all universal tools, designated tools, accommodations, and potentially some unlisted resources as determined by their respective IEP teams. If you are considering or you have a student with significant cognitive disabilities through that IEP process, it may be a discussion also that they would take all domains in the VCALPS and then moving forward all domains in the alternate assessment of ELPAC, knowing that at least at this point in time, should they be taking the VCALPS, they would receive a loss score. Again, for intents and purposes for today, we know that the ELPAC has been suspended. But we don't want to lose sight of all of the accessibility tools that are available to our students who are English learners and our students who are English learners with disabilities. Although I won't be reviewing Matrix 4, I have it here for reference only, as these accessibility tools that are indicated for our students do provide useful information and do provide us information that can carry over into distance learning. Just prior to school closures, many of you were having conversations related to the computer-based ELPAC and all of the embedded tools that were there and the non-embedded tools. Continuously, those conversations are important to ensure that the accessibility tools are part of everyday instruction during school closures and during distance learning, which I can't say is the easiest thing to do. All of our staff are slowly transitioning to different levels and depths of distance learning, which is clearly understandable, taken all of us by surprise. And you may be considering that at this time it may be a relaunch to share these matrices and accessibility graphics with your teachers, general education and special education, so that they continuously think about who are English learners and what types of accessibility tools can be incorporated during distance learning. The accessibility tools that are here can help shape your conversations, can continue to develop again as you're thinking perhaps about professional development, as you're thinking of what are your next reflective questions to share with your EL specialist or to share with that general ed teacher or that special education teacher. And you may need to find that staff and students alike require more teaching and learning on how to use the accessibility tools. So wherever you find yourself in that entry point, knowing that it's okay. As we practice again, patience and kindness with each other, there may be some aspects like accessibility tools that we're bringing to the forefront of our conversations once more. And we're refocusing and rethinking what this looks like now for students who are English learners and English learners with disabilities. I would be remiss to have a quick conversation about reclassification. And although we can't go into depth, I know that for many, this is a conversation that often comes up in our frequently asked questions. Whether general education ELs or ELs with disabilities, the conversation surrounds regarding, we have their prior scores, we have prior information, could we continue to engage in the conversation regarding reclassification? And the answer is yes, with some changes. So the 4 prongs continue to be necessary prongs, required prongs of this process. So those of us who are special educators, in as much as IDEA didn't have any waivers or changes, the same is true for our requirements when we consider the needs of our English learners, their needs for designated and integrated ELD, their needs for appropriate assessment, and for the prongs of reclassification. So your particular DLAC and ELAC has a process delineated of what belongs in each of the 4 prongs. Prong number 1, nevertheless, is now on that halt because we are not administering the summative ELPAC. So know that CDE did put out guidance. I do have the reference in the particular slide with it you will receive later, but do know that LEAs can use the results for students who completed the summative LPAC prior to the school closure. So you may have already engaged in assessment at that time and utilize that information to engage in conversation. So you may be having English language acquisition team meetings, SST meetings, EL division support meetings, where you're still talking about the requirements surrounding reclassification and students who may be eligible for reclassification. And then criterion 4. So in this respect, LEAs can use local assessments, prior years CAS scores, so 18-19 scores, and 1920 if available and applicable. So it may be that you're engaging in those conversations regarding reclass dependent on your students, always knowing that there's no rush to reclass. And then you may think, but wait a second, what about LP and all that information? And again, I'd always recommend and encourage no rush to reclass. What we truly want to see and continue to encourage of our students is that we see their continued progress, that if needing continued ELD supports and services, that they receive those ELD supports and services. And it's the progress that we hope to see ongoingly, that our students are continuing to demonstrate achievement in their respective ability. The 3 prongs regarding reclassification can be found in the practitioner's guide. So if this is a very hot topic for your respective COE, district, and or school, know that chapter 9 of the California Practitioner's Guide is where you want to go to and look at all of the information and those pathways, whether the student is an LPAC taker, or an alternate English language proficiency taker, and or IEP teams that are having collective discussions surrounding students who are taking perhaps the LPAC with domain exemptions in that pathway 3. So do know that those 3 pathways are further explained in the practitioner's guide in chapter 9. So let's pause right here. At this point, I would like to give you some time to reflect. I know it's a lot of information that's being reviewed. So please feel free to enter in the chat box 1 new learning and 1 wondering that you're holding. So what is your 1 new learning and 1 wondering in the chat box? We'd love to hear from you. I'll pause and stop there so that I can review the chat box. I know that my colleagues, Ms. Lupita Lean Rubio and Vanessa Lopez, are also responding to the chat box questions as we move forward. And I'd like to be able to grasp all the questions and catch as many as I can. So we'll pause there and take about a quick 3-minute break. Please enter those particular questions or hot topics into the chat box. Thank you. Thank you everyone for your comments in the chat box and your questions. One of the questions I wanted to specifically highlight, and it seems there was a couple surrounding the alternate English language proficiency assessment. At this point in time, your district would have locally determined, so what was in your EL master plan and or considered by your DLAC or your ELAC as your specific assessment tool. I can say, for instance, here in Imperial County SELPA, the VCALPS is the assessment that we're using as an alternate for this time and period. However, though, again, with school closures, we're not able to administer a summative assessment. It's not, again, appropriate to utilize during the video conferencing type of session. Do know that in January of 2021, CDE should be publishing as a field test the alternate ELPAC. Some of your districts may have engaged in the pilot to the alternate ELPAC. And though I can't disclose the makeup or what it looks like, I can tell you that it is specifically designed to meet the needs of students with significant cognitive disabilities. And many of us often use the term as for students with moderate to severe disabilities, although I have to say no one disability category would be captured, but rather looking at individual students, and those students specifically who have a significant cognitive disability are eligible for that alternate LPAC. Between schools reopening, so when schools reopen, to January 2021, when CDE launches the alternate LPAC, it is safe to say that you would continue to use your locally determined alternate LPAC, which may be the VCALPS or another assessment determined appropriate by your respective district. So again, we may have students who need initial assessment between schools reopening and the launching of the new alternate. So just know that that is something that you would continue to do until the alternate LPAC is available for everyone's use. So again, thank you for everyone. Continue the questions in the chat. They are extremely appreciated as we continue to move forward. So as we move into section 2, pre-referral and referral assessment and IEP processes. For the purpose of today, we will be focusing on chapter 3, special education referral process for English learners. In this particular chapter, as with the other chapters, you may find yourself at different entry points depending on the needs that you see within your districts. So it may be that you go directly to those frequently asked questions or the student scenarios. The student scenarios are very valuable if you're, again, needing to come to a point where can we look at an actual scenario of a student and how staff has reacted and worked towards this situation. The frequently asked questions as posed in each of the respective chapters are always very helpful, identifying which are the entry points that you wish to start your work with your respective teams. In this particular chapter, I will be looking especially at these questions. What pre-referral steps should be documented to ensure that a special education referral for an English learner is appropriate? And what is the process? Again, focusing on what is the process that you're engaging now. And it may be that you're rethinking, when schools reopen, how might I change the process? How might we relook at our process and how we actively engage in conversations surrounding English learners and our referral practices. MTSS process, always before special education referral. By design, the MTSS process is developed to have those difficult conversations, to detect and determine what is intensive support, what is universal support for everyone, reminding ourselves that all students are general education students first, that all students would have access and exposure support in the universal level, in supplemental supports, and then intensive supports, and then referral to special education. So that section of few students is not necessarily special education. It may be greater supports with collaborators who are also special educators, but that all students are supported with each of these prongs prior to referral. Chapter 2 has in-depth information regarding MTSS and MTSS processes. The resources on the California SUMS initiative is an excellent resource and tool that you might want to navigate with your respective teams if your tiers of intervention are where the majority of your conversations are still being held and or you're developing what you would like your tiers of interventions to look like within your respective county offices or districts. So chapter 3 of the practitioner's guide specifically talks about considerations prior to referral. And those of us who are special educators, we sometimes see that referral jumps quickly from what you see here as prong 1 or step 1, referral made by staff, to a quick jump to number 4. Let's assess. Let's refer and assess. When we look at these prongs for today's purposes, we truly want to focus on what are considerations prior to that referral, steps 1, 2, and 3. And we ask ourselves why. Why is it so important to emphasize that referral? Number 1, because we want to ensure that referrals are appropriate, but we also have to acknowledge that the history tells us in special education and in the history and the information we have surrounding English learners that our students haven't always had equitable access, that it's something that we continuously try to strive to achieve, equity and access for all learners. English learners need to have equal access to meaningful education and meaningful practices. That they have 3 prongs there, that they are supported in schools and districts that provide them with education that's grounded in sound evidence and theory. It's implemented in a sufficient manner that there's rigor for all students, and that we demonstrate evidence of effectiveness in the instruction that's provided to all of our students prior to that referral to special education. So as you see there, when we look at prongs 1, 2, and 3, we're trying to identify and develop and surround ourselves in as much information as we can prior to referral. So if we focus on this first prong of pre-referral, yes, referral can be made by any staff member, parent, guardian, counselor. Anyone really can say, I have a concern regarding a child. Pre-referral truly in this sense is to that multidisciplinary team, that student study team, you might call them student success teams. And we strongly recommend that your SST members have an extensive depth and breadth of knowledge about English language development and also understand the characteristics of disabilities. Sounds much easier said than done. So I go back to that original question when I asked, who and how are you gathering your general education staff and your special education staff to have these collaborative conversations? Because again, we can't be experts in everything. So the more that we can collaborate and participate and work connected with each other, we're able to have conversations about what does culturally responsive pedagogy look like? How can we consult with each other? Who are EL specialists who are trained in discerning cultural and linguistic differences? Who are special educators that can help us discern what might that disability look like? And we can ensure instruction is appropriate and supportive of that English learner prior to that referral for special education. In addition, the background knowledge that we have about a student will help us to make fruitful decisions about what interventions we need moving forward. Having SST members or student study team members, they can have those collaborative conversations will be in support of not only your team in building their skill set, but in support of the student. We do have child fine laws that obligate us in special education to ensure that we have students that are identified, located, and assessed. Nevertheless, we also want to identify that we're not overly identifying, locating, and assessing. So who are our students and how can we provide them with support? It is our responsibility of every district, and together to establish policies and procedures for continuous child find that addresses the relationships amongst identification, screening, referral, assessment, planning, implementation, review, so that we determine who are students and what are their needs. So as we consider all of these things, that CUME file has a very important role in the process. And you may be thinking, yes, I reviewed the CUME file, I looked at what's in the CUME file, but did we deeply look into the CUME file as a team and identify what this child's needs are individually? Having collective conversations surrounding what are the ELPAC scores? What do those ELPAC scores tell me? What is the student's history? Have there been breaks in learning and education? What does attendance look like? How has English language acquisition progressed over time? Have we seen a plateau in scores over time? What have been current interventions? What are previous interventions? Grades? Are there other medical factors? How have and what does it look like when that child receives designated and integrated ELD? Truly to help the team examine the student's story, the student's history, and to give us a broader picture of what the child's needs are. So rather than let's thumb through, but what does it mean collectively? How does one piece of information build upon another to tell us the story of this student, the individual student, and what his or her needs are? Prior to school closures, we could sit around a team and have conversations with each other about our students and what they need, look at the intervention and the practices, have more in-depth conversations with families. Who are the child's caregivers? Are they residing in multi-family homes? Are they being provided supports by grandparents? Maybe they are foster youth. Are there other surrounding needs that are also in this child's life that we need other kinds of supports? Maybe it's social emotional learning. Maybe it's other types of needs. Maybe the conversations are more so surrounding the fact that the child still needs some basic needs met, as opposed to child's not progressing, do we need to refer to special education? Although those all might be compounding and confounding issues, the more that we can disaggregate all of the needs of the child, we'll be able to craft interventions to support the unique needs of the individual student. So now those conversations are via phone, via Zoom, via Google, via Meets, but I highly encourage that those conversations continue to exist in your respective districts amongst your teachers so that we don't lose track of our children, that we keep them at the forefront of our minds and support each other in the work, that we practice that kindness with ourselves in support of each other, in support of our students, and talk about how can we design further supports, accessibility strategies, and interventions to meet the needs of the students. It may be that you're thinking, I'm going to call the EL specialist tomorrow, and I hope that is true. Or I'm going to call the general education teacher. If it is that you're a special educator who works with students with disabilities who are English learners, it may be that time again to relaunch that IEP at a glance so that they remember what are those accommodations already built into the IEP? What are the universal tools? What are the designated instructional supports that are necessary now as we continue to develop distance learning and are planning for when schools reopen? So we think of all of the factors prior to referral for students. So as we look at step 2, identification of the student's targeted needs via the team process, and really analyzing of what are the interventions that a child needs at that point. Current interventions and potential interventions that could be deployed, employed as we look at curriculum and instruction today, all prior to referral. So then that takes us to the pre-referral activities. So it may be that this is the child's first student study team or the second student study team. Some of your districts may be engaging in conversations of having teams continue to meet during school closures as teachers are finding that students are struggling for different reasons during distance education. That those are other conversations that need to be held as well. And what does distance learning look like? And how can it be accommodated, changed, relooked at, refocused to support the different needs of students? Rather than referral to special education when schools reopen. What can we do in our present moment? Which is very challenging for many and for our students who are receiving instruction and support. So progress monitoring is difficult during distance learning and things that teachers are now engaging in as they're considering grading processes. And whatever your district has chosen as grading processes during this time, progress monitoring and data collection, very, very important. In special education, specifically, if we are thinking in the back of your mind of ELs who are identified as having a disability, what does progress monitoring look like? Have we prioritized IEP goals? And always document, document, document. Well, the same would be true for a student who is an English learner who is potentially going to be referred for special education, or whom we're trying to encourage and develop more interventions for even now as we look at what their progress looks like. And what does specifically integrated and designated ELD look like for our students? Now more than ever, it has become challenging in having this discussion about our sacred designated ELD time and integrated ELD throughout every course, every subject matter area. How our students need taken into consideration. If we think about key themes regarding literacy and ELD, are students given opportunities for meaning making, for looking at content knowledge? Perhaps they need additional scaffolds, front loading, those additional videos prior to the actual lesson. The language development, the key vocabulary that they need to have access to that material, whether it's embedded instructional tools, additional instructional tools, paper-based or computer-based. Students still have this necessity to receive the supports, to access instruction, to get equitable instruction, and to ensure that they continue to build foundational school skills. That's where, again, the ELPAC accessibility comes into play, and potentially you're thinking also about this CASP, the Matrix 1 accessibility tools, as we continue to incorporate into online instruction or distance learning, what designated supports can look like, what accommodations can look like for students. Knowing that, as much as I mentioned that there have been no changes to IDEA, there have been no changes to our obligations, our federal obligations to how we incorporate support for our English learners. So all English learners receiving comprehensive ELD, both integrated and designated, which is part of their core instruction. So if we think our considerations, our pre-referral strategies, our designated and integrated ELD are part of those strategies, part of core content instruction, not an intervention, but part of the foundational supports that students who are English learners are receiving. English learners and English learners with disabilities receiving that designated and integrated ELD prior to school closures and during distance learning, and of course, moving forward. So this may be another area where you're thinking, our teams may need to come back collectively and have conversations. So if designated and integrated ELD continues to be an area of focus for your respective district, Chapter 7 of the California Practitioners Guide is where you will gravitate to. In addition, on our website, we do have a recorded session regarding specifically designated and integrated ELD for English learners and English learners with disabilities. So you may want to look towards that recording if that is somewhere that your team requires and desires further information. For us, I'd like us to take some time, however, to talk specifically about language differences versus disabilities. So we know that language, second language learners, second language in and of itself, having a different primary language, so language other than English, is not a disability. Students who are second language learners may be a child with a disability. But that SS team, that multidisciplinary team prior to referral of an English learner to special education eligibility will want to have these conversations surrounding language differences versus disabilities. Targeted ELD and designated is constantly occurring, yet the question may persist that the student is receiving the supports, the core content area that they need, and you're asking, is there a potential disability? How will I know? What are the differences between language difference and a disability? So at this time, I'd like to give everyone an opportunity to delve into the practitioner's guide. to look at a resource that was first created by an expert in the field and a retired SELPA director, Dr. Joyce Butterfield. So big thank you to her. So I'll be separating you into breakout rooms in just a minute. Once in your breakout rooms, you'll have an opportunity to focus on a set of learning behaviors and indicators of what a student may be demonstrating when that learning behavior is due to a difference, due to second language acquisition, and indicators of when that learning behavior is a possible learning disability. As a team, you'll review, discuss, so hopefully you'll unmute yourselves, maybe even unmute your camera, and have a conversation. Please designate one reporter in your breakout room who will share with the group. So when we bring you back, you'll share one new learning and one wondering that was still held by the group regarding your specific area. So you'll utilize the link that you see here, and we'll drop it into the chat box as well. That will take you to another set of slides where you'll see a section. So one group, for instance, will specifically look at oral comprehension and listening, while another group will specifically look at speaking and oral fluency. You'll select the slide. So the slide that corresponds to your group, so your breakout room number is your group number. You'll find that each slide has a group number assigned to it, which is the number of your breakout room. The slides are labeled accordingly. And if you have any questions, please drop your question into the chat box. And my colleagues and I will drop into your breakout rooms again to see if there are any respective questions that you'd like to address with us as well. So off to your breakout rooms to review language differences versus disabilities. And thank you again for this segue into the analyzing of data, because I had definitely heard the analyzing of data, how important that is. So database intentional teaching. Are the interventions and supports that are being provided with fidelity? Is there differentiation in each of those subject matter areas? And do we see it from a lens of asset building, that the child brings to the table information and knowledge in that primary language, in their robust experiences, and that we see that as a strength, that every child has a relative strength that they can bring to the table and how we can build upon that. I would be remiss to say that I know right now it's very challenging, and many of our English learners are falling through the fold because of issues such as technology deficiencies, supportive deficiencies, or other issues that they may need. And thank you, number one, I would not want to forget to say thank you to each one of you in the field who is making that extra stride and effort to contact your families, because it has become ever so challenging right now in our time of distance learning, and our students who are needing support, just to hear you call them and contact them, whether you're giving paper-based packets, distance learning, synchronous or asynchronous, everything in support of our students is valued. Everything that you're doing is valued, and know that practicing patience and kindness with yourself, with the families that you serve, is so very important. It always of data of our students. So data-based intentional teaching, culturally and linguistic responsive and relevant instruction, but it's that fidelity that we want to see. And it may be that the English learner is provided with several trials. 4 to 6 weeks, again, the research is telling us, is about the average from which we would see that a student is making some progress or some growth. We may need to tweak or add on to a specific intervention or tool that we're using with our students. Looking again at what is designated and integrated ELD look like for that child. How are we supporting the transition from that L1? How are we building English academic language for that child? Or have we tried successive trials that now we realize that in actuality, there's something more? Having looked at the language versus disabilities figure, we then look at, well, maybe there's another pondering, another question. Perhaps there is a disability need that we may need to move forward with referral. But again, all of those steps we'd want to acknowledge and look at. Previously, someone mentioned the pre-referral. There is a checklist. I did review items from this particular checklist as we were having this conversation and going through our slides, but I would highly recommend it for any group who says, we have a multidisciplinary team. We want to encourage or grow our multidisciplinary team. We need something we can sit around and look at a checklist together. objectively and have a conversation of what does our instruction look like? How do we build vocabulary? How are we encouraging speaking? How are we encouraging collaborative conversations between peers? How are we looking at the tools and the resources, the curriculum and the interventions that we have in our settings? What is tier 1, tier 2, tier 3? All prior to referral for special education. So this may be a checklist that your team decides that you want to gravitate to as you move forward. And considerations of what will your next steps be. So whether it's during distance learning or moving forward, that you acknowledge what are the supports that the student has received and how might we have continued conversations? Is this appropriate for referral? There's yet another appendix in the practitioner's guide that specifically causes the team to engage in reflective questions. Is this English learner appropriate for referral, or do we need to deepen or expand our specific interventions? So back to this SST wheel, as I call it. If you find that the team is having that conversation and moving towards this item number 4 of actual referral for special education, what that tells us is that identification of targeted needs have been noted, interventions have been implemented, that pre-referral activities have occurred, that progress monitoring has occurred, that we've looked at the linguistic challenges of the child, and on top of that, there continues to be wondering and a referral is put into place. Timeline then moves very, very quickly. So for my SPED friends, you're all aware of all these timelines that then occur. But importantly, we need the data necessary to ensure that we're assessing in all areas of suspected disability and that we're able to bring together data that will assist us in determining informatively, engaging in a comprehensive assessment to determine is the child actually eligible for a disability and not as a result of a limited English proficiency. And though our classroom practice have shifted, they absolutely have shifted, we then determine what this looks like. What are our scaffolds? What are our supports during distance learning? And it may look very different for different students, depending on their need. So again, chapter 7 might be another area. But before we leave each other today, I want to remind us of what the research has told us and the information that we know, that our students who are English language learners have twice the cognitive load. Much information that they're trying to decipher and discern, developing a new language while also trying to learn new content. When we think now then of a third prong, if the child is an English learner with a disability, they have 3 times, potentially feels like 5 times the load, because they have a little invisible brick now in her little pink backpack, where she is trying to navigate the world, learning a new language, new content, and also the difficulties of that child's specific and unique disability. So if you are working with students who are identified as English learners with a disability, that we collectively look at what is their disability category, how can we support them to meet the uniqueness of their type of learning disability, because as we know that students with the disability are very different depending on the disability category and identification that they have different needs. That disability impacts and affects learning in different ways, therefore potentially requiring different types and unique accessibility tools related to their needs as an English learner and their needs as a child with a disability. Very difficult process and very hard to discern. I'm not going to make light and say that it's an easy task, because it's not. And I know that our teachers engage in so much work and try their very best to do their very best for every single child. As a community, as a collaborative partner with you, know that we are here to help and support at Imperial County SELPA. I know we're running short on time. I highly encourage you to enter in the chat box any lingering questions. If you even want to leave us your email, you can. I encourage you to visit our website. We have other topics and other chapters that we go into as part of our website at imperialcounty.org, icoe.org/SELPA. There is a Padlet there as well as previously recorded sessions. And in addition, and I hope I didn't leave you with more questions that you came in with, but know that you can connect with us specifically through our website and our email. Improving outcomes _EL _SWD at icoe.org. Myself, Lupita Lin Rubio, Vanessa Lopez, we are a team together here to support and work with our system in California. Feel free to reach out to us, tweet us, connect with us via our email. Each one of us will receive an email via this particular, or myself, dmontoya at icoe.org. I thank you so much for your time, for joining today and engaging in conversation, rethinking, refocusing potentially in conversations. So thank you for joining. We will stay for any lingering questions that are in the chat box for about another 10 minutes because I don't want to rush anyone off. I appreciate your time and all that you're doing, specifically for English learners with disabilities, as we work in support of all of you for improving outcomes for English learners with disabilities. We look for the collective commitment that we all have to our students, and we look towards better days.